We'll call the regular meeting of the Pearland Planning and Zoning Commission, Monday, April 3rd, 6:35 p.m. Let the record show Thomas Duncan and Troy Potty are not present. Moving on to item 2, the consent agenda. We have 2 items under the consent agenda. Excuse the absent P&Z Commissioner David Selsky from the March 20th regular P&Z meeting, and approval of the P&Z regular meeting minutes from March 20th. Does anybody wish to remove anything, or do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda? Have a motion and a second. All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, moving on to new business item A. Consideration and possible action, master plat of Kirby Crossing. This is the southwest corner of Broadway and Kirby Drive. Do I hear a motion? Have a motion and a second. Now staff presentation.
Vince Husted, city staff. The general location of this property is the southwest corner of Broadway and Kirby Drive. As stated earlier, it is a request for a master plat that would result in 9 lots. This property is located in the western district of the Pearland Town Center Planned Unit Development that had been approved in February 15, 2006. Staff recommends approval of the master plat of Kirby Crossing be approved with the following conditions. The first condition is that all the common areas be shown and that will be maintained by the property's owners association by distinct shading or similar on the master plat as well as the utility plan. Number 2, that the label the width of the landscaping islands on the master plat as well as the utility 1 lines. The third condition is to add crepe myrtles and oaks in the landscaping perimeter of the detention area. Fourth is to remove all references from the plat referring to detention walls. 5 is to add a note specifically detailing who would maintain the detention pond. 6, to overlay the landscape plan onto the master plat so we can see how everything fits together. And finally, to provide a tree mitigation plan. And this is a aerial map of the property located in the southwest quadrant of Kirby Drive and Broadway Street. And that concludes my presentation.
Commissioners have any questions? Vince, do you have the landscaping plan?
Here's the landscaping plan.
Yeah, the only comment I have is that the landscaping plan hasn't changed to reflect the drainage, sloped drainage that was presented as the solution. And I couldn't read the schedule of plantings for the detention area, if that's going to have trees around it or...
One of our recommendations was to basically add some plantings around the detention area.
So staff's met with the developers' agents and in agreement on the conditions?
Yes.
Okay. You have any questions? Yeah, if you want to.
Okay, since I was the one who made the motion, I'll amend it to include staff's recommendations 1 through 7.
So we have a motion and a second to amend the motion. All those in favor of changing or amending the motion, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. So we have an amended motion with recommendations 1 through 7. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to item B, consideration and possible action, preliminary plat of Kirby Crossing, Section 2, replat number 1, for the same property. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Staff have anything to add to item B?
For the record, Vince Husted, city staff. Basically, this is the preliminary plat for that for Kirby Crossing, Section 1, replat number 1. Staff recommends that the preliminary plat of Kirby Crossing, Section 2, replat number 1 be approved with the following conditions. Number 1, that the preliminary plat of Kirby Crossing, Section 2, replat number 1 conforms to the master plat of Kirby Crossing. And number 2, that the preliminary plat of Kirby Crossing, Section 2, replat number 1 conforms to the approved Pearland Town Center Plan Unit development. And again, I will bring up the aerial photograph. The aerial photograph just shows the areas covered by the preliminary plat to account for the properties along Broadway that are already developed. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions? Questions?
I'd like to make a motion to amend the previous motion to include all of staff's recommendations, 1 and 2 on Kirby Crossing, Section 2.
Second.
Can we have a motion and a second to amend the original motion? All those in favor of the amendment, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Now have an amended motion with staff's recommendations number 1 and 2. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to item C, preliminary plat, Reserve Boulevard Street dedication. This is the west of State 288 from Medical Center Drive to Discovery Bay. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Have a motion and a second. Staff have a presentation.
Vince Husted, city staff. The preliminary plat of Reserve Boulevard Street dedication. Staff recommends that the preliminary plat of Reserve Boulevard Street dedication be approved with the following conditions. Number 1, that the street name be changed from Reserve Boulevard. And number 2, that the street light poles be placed to meet the City of Pearland's maximum spacing of 220 feet. And I will bring up a aerial photograph of the property. This is the property showing where the right-of-way will be placed between to connect to Discovery Bay Drive. That concludes my presentation.
Questions?
I have one. Wasn't this on our agenda last time to have the name changed? And it's still saying to have the name changed? Or am I thinking of something different?
I can answer that question.
Sure.
There was, this is, originally came to us as Reserve Boulevard street dedication. The next item on the agenda was originally Reserve Street dedication. And it was felt that having a Reserve Boulevard and a Reserve Street would be confusing. And even while I was preparing the staff reports, I had to be careful to make sure I didn't put the Reserve Street in with a Reserve Boulevard folder and vice versa.
Do you know the name of the street to the south?
Discovery Bay?
No, the
Sure.
north-south
It's currently a private drive,
private drive.
so it has no name at the moment. Had it had a name, the UDC would require that this name be similar to it, or rather be the same so that it goes all the way through. But because it is currently a private drive and not a street, that provision of the UDC does not apply. That doesn't mean that eventually it shouldn't be named, the private drive shouldn't be named just to make things better for citizens in the long run driving in the area, but it's not part of this plat process.
I'm not familiar with road naming and street naming, but was this just because that was a reserve and that was just the easiest thing to do without picking a name?
The name of the commercial development out there is called the Reserves. So I think the intent was to have a name match the name of the commercial subdivision, and that's why they wanted everything to be Reserve at first. But again, we wanted to reduce confusion, whether it be Reserve Boulevard, Reserve Street, or Circle, or whatever other ending of a street name you can have.
So you can go back to your recommendations so we can,
Need the,
the recommendation.
oh, recommendation, yes, sir. Again, the recommendation is that the plat be approved with the following conditions. Number one, that the street name be changed from Reserve Boulevard. And number two, that the street light poles be placed to meet the City of Pearland's maximum spacing of 220 feet.
Currently, what do they have shown?
I believe it's less than 220 feet.
It was more.
Oh, it's
It's
more.
more. I would think it was more. Okay. Who made the original motion?
I make a motion to amend the motion to include the two conditions.
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second to amend. All those in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. We have an amended motion. Hearing any other discussion? Nope. Okay, with an amended motion with two staff recommendations added, all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to item D, consideration and possible action, preliminary plat of Commerce Drive street dedication, west side of State Highway 288 access road between Medical Center and Discovery Bay Drive. Your motion?
Motion.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Staff have a summary.
Vince Husted, city staff. The preliminary plat of Commerce Drive street dedication. On this one, the applicant did change the name of the street so that it will now be Commerce Drive Street. The only condition that we're recommending is that the applicant obtain approval from the Texas Department of Transportation to allow the connection of Commerce Drive to the State Highway 288 frontage road prior to recordation. And that concludes, well, let me put up the aerial map here. That concludes my presentation.
So is that condition required? Because won't they have to do that to get that access?
Yeah, it's our, we just want to make sure that they have permission from the state to be able to connect their street to the state highway right away.
question?
Yes, I want to know why it says Commerce Drive Street. It should be either Commerce Drive or Commerce Street, but not both.
Well, the name of the street will be Commerce Drive, but the street just refers to the fact it'll be a street dedication of right-of-way.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify
Sure.
because it sounded,
That's a good question.
Make a motion
Up to you.
to amend the original motion to include the condition.
second.
I have a motion and a second to amend, adding condition 1 from staff. All those in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. I have an amended motion, adding staff's recommendation. All those in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0 with one condition. Okay, consideration, item E, consideration and possible action, final plat of Riverstone Ranch at Clear Creek, Section 7. This is a request of Renee Rodriguez of LJA Engineering on behalf of Shannon Weisbabe of Meritage Home owner to approve the final plat of Riverstone Ranch at Clear Creek, Section 7, creating 48 single-family lots and 5 reserves. This is north of Clear Creek, east of Riverstone Ranch Drive. Do I hear a motion?
I move that it be approved.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. Staff have a presentation.
The preliminary plat of Riverstone Ranch at Clear Creek, Section 7. Basically, for the site history, the preliminary plat is located in an area covered by the Riverstone Ranch Cluster Development Plan adopted on December 4, 2006. The preliminary plat of Riverstone Ranch Section 7 was approved on June 20th, 2016. The staff recommends approval of the final plat of Riverstone Ranch Section 7 with the following conditions. Number 1, that the final plan to meet the Parkland Dedication Ordinance per Cluster Plan be completed. And number 2, that the standard development note granting all adjoining residential property driveway access be added to the plat. And here is a aerial photograph of the property in question. That concludes my presentation.
So in 2006 was the only condition, the parkland dedication of the cluster development? Is there other conditions in the cluster?
Right now, we're in the process of working with the Parks Department to get the parkland issues resolved on this. Normally, with a final plat, it would be required that the applicant pay the parkland dedication fee. However, in this case, there was an issue of dedicating parkland instead of money to the park systems. However, the Parks Department did not want to accept the land that was going to be dedicated for parkland dedication. And that is the issue that's having to be worked out with the applicant.
So just a question, could parks, is that they can deny?
The Uniform Development Code does allow the Parks Department to deny proposed dedicated property. It could be, and in this particular case, it was in part because of the topography, but it's also in part because of the amenities in the area. Instead of proposing to do the parkland, I think the negotiation between the city and the developer is, instead of giving us that land, please enhance the trail system that goes over in this area. And we're working out amendments to both the cluster plan and to the development agreement to finish that trail area and their dedications to that trail, or their fiscal contributions to that trail system.
And that change to the cluster development would come back before us?
For the cluster development portion of it, yes, if that's required as a part of the cluster development, but for the development agreement, that would go to City Council and not to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
So could you bring up your recommendation
Recommendations.
again?
Again, I'm Vince Husted, city staff for the public record.
Y'all have any questions for staff?
Here's the staff recommendation. Again, the following conditions are, number one, that the final plan to meet parkland dedication ordinance per cluster plan be completed, and number two, that the standard development note granting all adjoining residential property driveways access be added to the plat.
On the land that the Parks doesn't want to take, what are they going to do with that land? Are they going to make it into residential lots, or is there going to be a eyesore out there for everybody to look at?
It's my understanding that it's going to probably be redevelopment for residential lots. However, that process is ongoing at this time as to what exactly it'll be in the long run.
Who made the original motion?
I did, I'm thinking.
Take your time.
Okay, I'll amend the motion to include the two recommendations of staff.
Have a motion and a second to amend. All in favor of the amendment, signify by raising your right hand. All, okay. That motion passes 5-0. Now we have an amended motion for a final plat with two conditions. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, motion passes 4-1. Moving on to item F, consideration and possible action, preliminary plat of Tranquility Lakes Estates. This is a request of John English, Eureka Engineering, the applicant on behalf of Renee West, development owner, for approval of preliminary plat of Tranquility Lakes Estates, creating 24 single-family lots and 5 reserves on 15.7778 acres on the north side of Fight Road and 150 feet west of Meadowhurst Drive intersection. Do I hear a motion?
I move it be approved.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Staff, will you give a report on this one?
Vince Husted, city staff. The preliminary plat of Tranquility Lakes Estate is located on the north side of Fight Road, about 150 feet west of the Meadowhurst Drive intersection. As for the plat status, on March 20th, 2017, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the requested variance from Section 2.4.4.5C1A, B, and C of the Unified Development Code Ordinance Number 2000T to increase the maximum accepted length of a cul-de-sac from 1,200 feet by 205.3 feet to allow the cul-de-sac to be 1,405.3 feet long for the property in question. Staff recommends approval of the preliminary plat of Tranquility Lake Estates with the following condition. Number one, that a note be added to the plat that on March 20th, 2017, a note to be added that the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the requested variance from Section 2.4.4.5C1A, B, and C of the Unified Development Code Ordinance Number 2000T to increase the maximum accepted length of the cul-de-sac from 1,200 feet by 205.3 feet to 1,405.3 feet. We feel that this node is important, so then in case somebody's doing research in the future on the plat and wondering why cul-de-sac had been approved that's longer than the regulations would state. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I guess the chair would like to amend the original motion to add staff's condition number 1.
I'll second.
Mary Starr with a second. All those in favor of amending the motion, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. And we have an amended motion on the table for approval. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, moving on to item G. Consideration and possible action, replat of Corrigan North, partial replat number 1. A request of Donna Eccles, ProServe, the applicant on behalf of Donald E. Beans. Sorry if I got that wrong. For approval of a replat of Corrigan North, partial replat. Number 1, creating 2 single-family lots on .4467 acres of land located at 2411 Anthony Drive and 2408 Goodrich Drive, and that would be the location as well, 2411 Anthony Drive and 2408 Goodrich Drive. Do I hear a motion?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. We have a staff report?
Yes, sir. Vince Husted, city staff. To summarize the request, I'll bring up the plat itself. Basically, what it is, there's 2 existing platted lots in a residential subdivision. Both lots have houses on them that the applicant owns, or the property owner. And basically what it would do is take the side yard of the house that is on Goodrich Street and add it to the property that the applicant owns on Anthony Drive. And so basically it would reconfigure the lots, making one of the lots bigger and the other lot smaller. And it would, it's the applicant's intention or the owner's intention to increase the size of the backyard on Anthony Drive. As for the staff recommendation, the plat would create a double frontage lot on a residential street in a residential area, contrary to the intent of section 3.2.142E of the UDC, which states double frontage lots shall be avoided. And that's the only reasons for the staff to not recommend approval of this replat. That concludes my presentation.
Does the applicant want to address the commission?
Yes, I have been after that piece of land for a long time.
If you could just step to the mic and give your name and address just for the record.
I'm Donald Bennis. I've been in Pearland all my life. Own both these pieces of property. Been wanting it for a long time, and the lady behind me died, and that property went up for sale, so I bought it, thinking I could get that piece of property behind my yard so I can increase my backyard. I had a little bitty backyard. And that piece of property is used for nothing but for people to walk their dogs, if you understand what I'm saying. It's nothing else. There's nothing on that piece of property at all, except there's a fence going right through the middle of it, which I would like to remove that fence and move the fence up to close to the sidewalk. I'm not planning on putting any kind of driveway in there. The house next to me has a driveway on that street and a mailbox on Anthony, on both, So I'd be doing the same thing they are. I'm not planning on putting a driveway there. There's absolutely no reason that I can see for me not to have that land. I've got about $170,000 invested in it right now. And that's the only reason I bought that property is because I wanted to be able to change my property lines. And it's kind of crowded. I never thought anything would be this complicated. But that's my presentation. It's a very simple thing. The house that I'm making smaller, the yard, is still a big lot compared to the rest of them around there. So both of us would have a bigger lot. He'd have a smaller lot, but it's still bigger than most of them around there. No reason I can see. It wouldn't be two frontages. It'd be a backyard and a front yard. And that's all I can say for it.
Thank you, and we may have some questions for you if the other commissioners do.
Is there a house on the property now?
Yes, but there's not a house behind me. You know,
No, I'm talking about the one that you're trying to get, the one that they're talking about would be a backyard.
Yeah, that's really a side yard for the house that I bought. And it's a big side yard. It goes 105 feet off to the side, and it's never been used for anything except for the mowers to mow it. And people walking their dogs.
So basically, you bought a vacant lot.
It's just a piece of wasteland, really. But I've already planted a dozen trees on it.
Daryl, if I understand correctly, the side lot he's talking about is the side lot of a residence that he purchased. So he owns two homes.
Right.
One is the side lot. He wants to make the side lot the rear lot of your main home, correct?
Where I live,
Your
yes.
main, yeah, okay.
And I've already planted trees on it and everything.
But the property that you bought, I mean, it was the one that you're talking about, the dogs use and everything like that, that's vacant right there.
There's a house, but it's a side yard for that house because there's an ordinance saying they couldn't put their fence past the front of the house.
Okay.
So bring up the two
So there's
plats
a
to
fence
show.
going right down the middle of this property, but there's nothing in front of it.
I can bring up the pictures on the
It's about
PowerPoint.
50 foot by
Yeah, that'd
100
be good.
foot, and it comes to a point.
I've got some pictures of the side yard here. Let's see, this is the applicant's property on Anthony Drive. Another picture of the same. And then here's the property, that's the property with the large side yard.
That side yard is off to the left over there.
And I've got another picture of it here, showing the trees that were planted. And then here's a third picture showing just the side yard of the house.
Yeah, that's the land I'm trying to plat right there where them trees are planted.
So where's the RV going? On the side of that fence, or on the side of the fence?
That fence there would be tore down, and I'd move my fence out for about 3 feet from the sidewalk. And my neighbor's got a fence already in that area right there, on that sidewalk there.
I guess the wording and owning a main home and a lot next to it, I understand what you're trying to do. I certainly don't have any issue with this plat. I guess it's all wording, shall be avoided. And when we use that term with pump out detention ponds, that doesn't mean you can't do it. It means it should be avoided. This is definitely a different circumstance because I think looking at the major plat of the subdivision, this is a unique
The way it's
layout.
shaped is unique.
It's a
because it kinda
unique
comes
shape
to
for a
triangle.
subdivision that we don't normally see now. I don't have an issue with this.
I don't really either. The only thing that, the way I look at it, this subdivision's what, 40 years old?
About 40
45?
years old, yes.
And that vacant lot's been there the entire time, so, if somebody's willing to utilize it in some way, more power to them.
I think the only comment I'll add is that we're dealing with the plat and the lines, that if there's any city codes or ordinances for access or any issues there, it's
There's
not-
plenty of
it's-
access. There'll be gates
It's,
where
it's,
where they
I'm
can
saying
get
it's
to it.
not it's not an action of this body. We're only dealing with with the plat lines and combining them. So that's why I don't have an issue with it. I mean, more power to you.
Hearing from the Planning and Zoning Commission and also reading the staff report, the only recommendation that I would make to this body, whether you do it tonight or if you postpone it to try to address the issues, is you might be able to address the purpose of the UDC and staff comments by adding notes to the plat, such as if it would be a double front yard, establishing via plat which one's the front yard, where the setbacks would be, what the restrictions, if any, would be on the fencing. Of course, a concern on this type of thing would be you could put normally in a rear fence, it could be much higher than what you would on a side fence. We've referred to it as a vacant lot, but it's actually a side yard. It's not a vacant lot. And you want to establish all those things in the plat, and then, of course, make sure that this plat also honors whatever the prior plat that it's meaning to replat would be. The example of that would be, I think there's a utility easement. I'm trying to read it here on the proposed replat, but my eyesight's kind of failing on that one. I've tried to zoom in a few times. So you might be able to address staff comments and the purpose of the UDC with staff notes, whether you want to do that from the podium, from the dais tonight, or if you wanted to postpone it and work with Mr. Bennis and ProServe, his surveyors, on that type of issue.
There is an easement going through the middle of it, which is be accessible from the power company and the cable companies.
I think staff had talked about the fencing issue. We've talked about the easement that goes through it there. There's been discussion tonight about an RV and whether there's restrictions on driveways or something like that, where they access from. Of course, our engineering design criteria manual would address, where you can access a driveway, if you could put a new one in there, if this has to come from the front yard all the way to the back, or whether he can have a driveway off of Goodrich Street there. But that's also something that could be addressed with a plat note. Or if the engineering department, if they knew and they were prepared to comment on that today, that might be something that you can make an amended motion from the dais from.
So how would the RV access the side yard?
Do what now?
How would the RV access the side yard? Would it go from Goodrich or would it come from the other side?
How would we access it?
Well, the RV's got to get into that yard somehow, right? The RV's going to be stored in that yard.
I think what
Well, I don't have to put my RV in there, but I didn't want to put my boat in there.
I think that
I have a gate on that fence where I can just open it up and back my boat up.
on our staff report, it was for possible RV storage, and I guess that's kind of an undefined, RV, boat, trailer,
I wasn't planning on putting a driveway in there
from Goodrich. So you certainly wouldn't have an issue with a note that access be from Anthony, is it right? Anthony?
But I do want to put a fence along the sidewalk, about 3 foot from the sidewalk.
Yeah, and I think the existing fence that's out there from the neighbors is right on the side, like a foot back, right?
That's what it appears based on a site visit out there to the neighborhood.
Wouldn't it have to, the new plat would have to, when it came to fencing and setbacks and everything, the new plat would have to abide by all of the present setback rules.
I didn't understand.
So it wouldn't need notes, it just had, because the notes are already there. You have to, if it has to be so many feet from the sidewalk and all that. He's already got trees planted on it. I don't think he's going to tear up the trees and put in a driveway.
No, I'm not going to put a driveway. It won't have anything to do with my house.
So I think really most of that is included in the platting and setback rules that are already in place.
So just out of curiosity, Mary, the next homeowner buys the house, can they make the Goodrich side of it the front of the house if they chose to? Could they switch it?
I don't see how they could. They got another house over there.
No?
Well, no, I don't think they could.
Why not?
How are they going to do that?
I think they could. They'd have a
they'd have to have permission, they would have to have permission to do it.
Well, that,
Yeah, that's what they're getting tonight.
No, they're not. They're
That-
getting permission to change their lot line. That's it.
I mean, the way that side yard is it's almost like a leftover piece of property. It was where it was attached to the property where the house is on Goodrich, because it's about the width of a standard lot, but because of the angle of that property line, there's no room to, there wasn't a room for them to practically put another house on that property, so it's, that particular lot just ended up with a large side yard.
Really a piece of wasteland right now.
So would this help matters if, for staff, if we added a condition that this have single access from Anthony Street only?
Yes, sir.
Would that be an acceptable condition to staff, single condition?
Yes, sir.
Would that be acceptable to the applicant?
Now, to do what now?
We'd only have access from Anthony Street
Right.
as a condition of this approval.
Well, what are you talking about access? I'd have a gate on Goodrich side for whatever, to get into the yard if I had to.
Like a pedestrian gate?
Just an opening, just a fence gate.
Yeah.
Just big enough to back a truck into if I had to. But, but it wouldn't be a driveway, it'd just be access.
You can debate that it is a driveway. I think that's a challenge, that you can have a house that has driveway on two different streets.
But I couldn't make a road between Anthony and Goodrich through my property there because I've got a bunch of trees there. And I'm planning on putting a 10 by 16 tool shed right in there too.
If I may, one of the challenges from the city perspective, when you back vehicles over curb and gutter streets, you damage the curbs, then the result of that is that the taxpayers have to pay to replace those curbs. And that's why, if we're going to allow this, we would ask that you restrict it to pedestrian access and not allow vehicular access from Goodrich Street. And then I don't remember if there was an issue with the fencing and the height of the fencing and whether we need to address that or not with a note on the plat. But those are the concerns that staff would have with having something. I think that the double frontage provision in the UDC is meant to address some of those types of issues. Again, I'm not a resident of the neighborhood. I couldn't tell you what the fence is going to look back like over there and how it's going to conform with the character of the community, but that would be the type of thing that staff is asking for, to make sure that now that it's going to be double frontage and he can have his back fence be all the way up against Goodrich, that fence conform to the community fencing in terms of height, so that you don't have a compound kind of feel from the Goodrich side, whereas from the Anthony side it looks like a normal subdivision. And oftentimes that's just caused by the setback itself. So I think that that's what staff was intending to address. And if I've got that misstated, right, I gladly invite staff to come on up to a podium and make your concerns known, so that the Planning and Zoning Commission can make proposed conditions to the proposed plat accordingly.
No, here's this, because it's a replat and not a rezone, did neighbors have to be notified about this discussion tonight?
With a replat, typically only the people who are owners on that plat would have to be notified, and as, Mr. Bennis, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Mr. Bennis owns both lots. He is the only person, I think, who had to be notified, and not the adjoining neighbors, including the one person, I think, who would be most, I don't know if impacted is the word to say it, but the corner street at the intersection of Anthony and Goodrich. And that person may be here tonight. I don't see that person here, so I don't know what their intent is.
You're talking about the curbs are in bad shape already anyway.
I don't disagree with you, sir.
Another thing,
subdivision's 40 years old. Somebody coming in here and building a brand new home, you know, even if it had enough room for a lot, or two hundred, I got a problem with telling him what he can do with property that he's already bought. I would think that anything that he did was detrimental to the subdivision and be handled under their HOA anyway, wouldn't it?
I don't know if that subdivision has an HOA, and the city's not responsible for enforcing HOAs.
Do they have an active HOA?
Do what?
Do they still have an active HOA?
Active backyard?
No, does
did that
that Corbin subdivision still have
Microphone.
an active
Homeowners
homeowners association?
No, we haven't. For the last, I've been there for
I don't think it ever had one.
almost 30 years, and they
It never did have one.
They never did.
The original plat for the neighborhood doesn't reference a homeowners association or property owners association, so I don't know if one was created subsequently, if there are any deed restrictions or not, but looking at the original plat, we don't see any notes indicating that there is one there.
we've never had a homeowner association, not as long as we've been there anyway.
And as far as the neighborhood itself goes, on making a site visit of the neighborhood, it's pretty much built out.
They don't.
I would like to recommend if the commission is willing to act tonight, a note be added to the plat limiting access from Goodrich, only one access, no vehicular access from the backyard, preventing that access from Goodrich. So if we're ready to act tonight, I'm asking that the commission recommend that. Because to make sure compliance with the UDC states that avoid double frontage when possible. So if we can add that, recommend that addition to the plat. If we're ready to act tonight.
And I'm actually comfortable with that recommendation, but I understand that it goes against what he's trying to accomplish, right? So
No, it
he
doesn't.
from what I understand, he wants to be able to back a truck or a boat or an RV through the Goodrich and proposed entrance to access the property, which, even if it's not slanted, I mean, it's an access, whether or not there's a curb there or not, you're creating an access. And I think that's the issue.
If I can just speak, and this is where the commission gets kind of in a pickle. If we approve it without a condition, and there's a use that is an issue with the community, and this seems odd. I've got the same situation with my lot. I can't find a way to get my RV onto that lot without spending a bunch of money to get it there stored, so I pay to store it somewhere else, even though I have a nice piece of property I could use for it. If the proposal was I want to put in a driveway and access the backyard put a driveway cut there, staff's recommendation, if I understand this correctly, would be no, because of the ordinance saying you can't have two fronts to your property, which would have two accesses on each side. I get that. I've also seen numerous older properties in Pearland that have unique lots that the owners have put in gates to back a boat into, and they go over the curb and they do it regularly and break the curb. That's not an issue to them because they're getting a use out of it. But it may be an issue to the surrounding community that says, look, why is he allowed to do this? And the commission agreed to it, and it's back on us. I would be in favor of having the note put on there for no vehicular access from Goodrich, which would make the yard bigger. I don't see a problem with making the yard bigger. I have a problem with the city's concern over access with the vehicle. I have no issue with you cutting out that section and making your backyard bigger. Everybody would like would like to have that opportunity to do that if they could. So that would be my recommendation for the commission, is to add staff's recommended note on the plat for for no vehicular access. The fencing height, I don't know what that is in the subdivision. In my subdivision, it's regulated. I would just add the note match existing. Because we have a request from the my HOA all the time. They want to put in an 8-foot fence or a 7-foot fence, and the fences are 5 feet. And that would just look odd to have one tall section right in the middle of everything. So is that a note that so to make this,
The height is one issue. I think the other concern was how far from the sidewalk would that need to be? Could they build right up on the sidewalk? If I'm understanding staff's concern correctly.
isn't that
Typically, that would be something that a setback would address, but with it being 2 front yards, or double lot frontage.
I think there's a standard there as well, because the existing corner point yard or point house there has a fence along Goodrich already that could be matched. It would look exactly the same as what's there.
So when Mr. Bennis comes in for a fencing permit, staff is going to look at the amended plat, and the only thing that we ask is that the notes say that it match the height of 7 feet or no greater than 7 feet, and then it be the same distance from the sidewalk or no greater or no closer to the sidewalk than that corner house there on Glastonbury and Anthony. I don't know the exact feet here today, but if you're specific in your reference, we can make sure that this conditional approval is reflected in the final plat accordingly.
Any other comments? I'll take a shot at that amended motion. Okay.
Let's ask, is he comfortable with that?
Mr. Bennett, if you want to come back up, anything you say we need to have from up here, because this is being recorded and.
I am comfortable with not having a gate there or access from Goodrich. I'm not comfortable with it, but I mean, I'll go along with that. As far as the fence goes, my neighbor's fence is already there, and it's only about 6 inches from the sidewalk, and I would like to have enough gap between the sidewalk and my fence where I can have a little grass there and just, it'd look nicer. And I'll build a fence there with just with a small gate for people to go through it.
On the setback, I'm not sure how the plats show the property lines, and the fencing typically is inside that, probably the minimum. They want to maximize their backyard and put it within a foot of the sidewalk. Is there any staff recommendation on the placement of the fence? Is he going to have an issue putting it 3 feet back?
2 feet or 3 feet, either one, but just a little bit further back. Well, I can grow some grass there.
It could potentially affect the front yard setback, because that side, yard is actually the front yard of another property, so it could have some potential impacts from that, or the issues with that, right?
It's not the front yard of anything.
Currently, right now, it's the front yard of the Goodrich property.
They will still have a very large front yard without that side yard.
I see this fence going from the point backyard all the way down to the first yard, and I've seen that I know I've seen that in the city in a unique
I think
layout like that.
part of the confusion is like the height of a maximum height for a fence in a front yard is a lot less than it is for a backyard. And
Aren't all the fences in that neighborhood the same
Yeah,
height?
most of them are 7 foot.
About 6,
Yeah,
7
the wooden
feet?
fences are all 7 foot.
Is that,
And there's a lot of them.
I mean, like in my neighborhood, along Veterans, there's a higher fence than the rest of the neighborhood. So, but the pictures I've seen, it seems like it's all the same height. Is that true?
Yeah, they're all right in about 7 foot. at this time.
Help me get out of this.
I would recommend that the fence that you recommend for here be matching the fence that's currently on his property, and probably more importantly, the height of the fence at, is that 2413, Anthony?
Right.
So there's your specificity to make sure that we match it and you don't create discord in the community. And by saying current, we'll be able to, if there's a question, go out, measure it, and have that reflected in the final plat. And then also recommend that the distance from the sidewalk not be any closer than the side yard at 2413 Anthony. So if he wanted to push it a little bit further back from the sidewalk, he can, but he can't get any closer to the sidewalk.
Almost couldn't.
Yeah. it's all
And by
showing.
doing that, you're making sure that this corner where you're looking at that area is in conformance with the community as it is already. So, and I think that that's what staff's primary concern was with the, or that's what the UDC is primarily concerned, and that's what it's meant to intend to address by preventing double frontage lots, along with the vehicular access, or somebody choosing that, no, this week I want to be on Goodrich, I want my address over there, versus on Anthony, one way or the other.
Okay, thank you. So this being the night of amended motions, the chair wishes to amend the original motion for approval to include 3 staff recommendations. One, that the fence height and type match the current residence at 2403 Anthony. That the setback for the fence from Goodrich be no closer to the sidewalk than 2413 Anthony. And that access to Goodrich Street be limited to a pedestrian gate in the fence only.
The one thing that I would ask for more specificity is the side yard. You said you set back the same as the Anthony one, and it really is going to be the side yard setback for.
Okay, to clarify, my references to 2413 Anthony would be the side yard setbacks.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Mary seconds. All those in favor of amending the original motion, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Any further discussion? Staff okay? Good?
Yes.
All those in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you for your time. I know it's kind of crazy, but all these processes for the greater good make a little sense in the long run.
What's my next step?
Getting your permit.
His next step is to amend the final plat to reflect these conditions.
But then going, and it goes through. So just for my clarification, what's the next approval step for this? What is it? Does it end here, or does it
It
stops
ends here,
and then
however,
he
staff will
has
not
to
provide
record
you
it?
with the Mylar until those conditions that you made tonight are present, and then you as a body will have the opportunity to sign, you as the chair have the ability to sign that Mylar as soon as staff is satisfied that the conditions have been met.
And I'll be contacting the surveying company with those conditions.
And Mr. Bennis will get with you with Vince, and he'll take care of you, and then he'll call me to sign the plat whenever it's ready.
Wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Moving on to item I, consideration possible action, variance from minimum lot width to allow platting of a flag lot.
Commissioner Tunstall,
Sorry.
I think you said I and
It's
I
H.
think we're on H. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. You're
also a
you're
flag
right.
lot, but
It's also a flag lot. So strike that. Item H, consideration possible action, variance from minimum lot width and area to allow platting of a lot and the creation of a flag lot. This is a request of David Randolph of Lentz Engineering, applicant on behalf of O.P. Both and Both Estates Holdings LLC, owner, for approval of variance permitting in Section 2.445, Section C, 1, A, B, and C of the Unified Development Code, ordinance number 2000T, to allow approval of creation of a 3.1 acre flag lot and to create a 0.63 acre lot with a reduced minimum lot width from 150 feet to 90.04 feet on 4.6 acres of land zone general business. This is on the southeast corner of Broadway and the Shadow Creek High School access road. Do I hear a motion?
Have a motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Staff have a presentation.
Yes, sir. This request, the applicant intends to plat, excuse me, 3 separate lots for future commercial development through the minor plat process. 2 of the proposed lots will require variances in order to be platted in their proposed configurations. The 2 variances are as follows. Number 1, to reduce the width of the pole from 50 feet to 25 feet for the 3.18 acre flag lot. And also, the second variance would be to reduce the minimum lot width of the 0.63 acre lot from 150 feet to 90.0 feet, or 90.04 feet. The property encompasses 4.6 acres of land zoned general business located at the southeast corner of Broadway and the Shadow Creek High School access road. Staff recommends approval of the request from the variance from Section 2.4.2.4 C1B of the Unified Development Code Ordinance number 2000T, number 1, to reduce the width of the pole from 50 feet to 25 feet for the 3.18 acre flag lot permitted shown as Tract A on the survey, and number 2, to reduce the minimum lot width of the 0.63 acre lot from 150 feet to 90.04 feet, shown as outpad number 1 on the survey. And with that, I will show this survey. The area labeled as Tract A will be the flag lot, and the flagpole that would be 25 feet would extend to Broadway Street, and then the outpad 1 would be the lot that would have the minimum width along Broadway of 90 feet allowed instead of the normal 150 feet required of the zoning district. And I have an aerial photograph of the property here. Let's see.
Is the reference to outpad standard?
No, sir. In the planning process, we would require the properties to be labeled as a Lot 1, Lot 2, Lot 3.
Is the applicant here?
Yes, sir. Do we have any idea what type of business might go in on the flag lot? And the only reason I ask is, I see that one exit to it goes on the only road that goes into the high school, and that's a high-traffic road for kids walking to school.
Actually, can I have the map back, please? My name is O.P. Bhatt. I'm the owner. Yes, please.
There.
Okay. Yes, the school road is a semi-public or private road, and there is access from that. But if you can see on this, it's my lot is in darker lights, but the lot right next to it, which is already platted for a center at Ridge Rock, they already have the 50 feet flag lot assigned to their back lot, meaning they already have access to Broadway. And the way the plat is recorded, we will have all commercial properties adjacent have access to that road. So that's the reason we're asking for the variance for 25 feet, because we really don't need to put a road to access Broadway. We already have access to Broadway from adjacent property. Absolutely, the traffic, but the traffic is normally 8:30, I don't know what time high school starts, it's been too long, I've been in high school, 8 to 9, and then 3 to 4. But as you see, there's two accesses, one which is about 150 feet, 200 feet from Broadway, and the other one will be about almost 450 feet. But if you look at it, we have 1, 2, 3 accesses to Broadway, and that's one of the reasons we're asking for the variance, because that would allow us to put 2 lots in the front, really nice piece of property that'll come to Pearland. The first one will be Starbucks, and the other one is Med Express Urgent Care.
But you don't yet know what would be on that third part behind it?
Oh, not right now. It could be a retail center. It could be, we're working with Bioplasma right now, which is, I guess it's a clinic that collects plasma from patients to be able to get to the other patients who need it. But I can't say right now.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All ready to vote? All those, good? I don't think staff has conditions. They recommended approval.
I'll put the recommendations back on the screen. Let's see. There it is.
There are no-
Vince, if you
there are
could
no
clarify, the
conditions.
staff recommendation is actually the variance request. Is that, it's not something separate from what the variance request was for?
Right, it's just,
So as the motion stands,
It's good.
We just got into a habit tonight.
right, yeah, because this
it's
is
a
a
straight vote.
variance request instead of a plat.
Okay. All those in favor, signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed? Motion passes 4-1. Likewise, you have the opportunity to record, if you wish, reason of opposition for council purposes, if you want to.
Simply because when I look at that road going from Broadway to the school, and I pass it every day, there are a lot of kids walking on that back and forth. There are going to be 2 entrances to a business that I don't know what kind of business that's going to be yet. And I just think it could be a safety issue depending on what's there.
Thank you. Okay, now moving on to letter I, recommend consideration possible action variance from minimum lot width to allow platting of a flag lot. This is a request of Janelle Jamez, applicant on behalf of Bonnie Hogan, owner, for the approval of variance permitted in section 2.6.1.1B1 of the Unified Development Code Ordinance number 2000T to allow approval of the creation of a flag lot in the SR 12 suburban residential zoning district on approximately 0.8278 acres of land. This is 2018 Lee Road, shown as 2122 Lee Road on the city's GIS. Do I hear a motion?
I move that it be accepted.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Staff of,
Yes, sir. Vince Husted, city staff. Staff recommends approval of the requested variance for the property described as a survey of 0.8278 acres, 36,060 square foot tract of land located in the HTB and RR survey, abstract number 243, Brazoria County, Texas, and being a portion of Lot 24, Section 19 of the Allison Ritchie Gulf Coast Home Company Survey, subdivision of record under Volume 2, page 24 of the Deed of Records, Brazoria County, Texas, DRBCT, to create a flag lot per the requirement of Section 2.6.1.1B1, which requires the approval of the Planning and Zoning Commission to create a flag lot for the following reasons. Number one, the Unified Development Code will ensure that the development of this property is in conformance with the goals of the city. And number two, the proposed lot will exceed the minimum lot area of the SR 12 Suburban Residential Zoning District. The only thing that this lot does not conform to is, of course, the minimum lot, which is the reason for the request before you tonight. And I would like to also add that the flag lot would have a 54.80 foot wide flagpole that would extend 150 feet back to the flag portion of the lot. The UDC specifies a minimum 50 foot width for non-residential flag lots, but this does not specify a similar minimum for width for residential flag lots. However, even with this particular flag lot, it would be slightly wider than that 50 feet.
Anybody have any questions on this one? Doesn't look like the applicant's here if we had questions. I don't have any issue with this one. The staff had no concerns? Okay. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. That takes care of new business. Moving on to item 4, discussion items. Number 1. So we're going to discuss the City of Pearland subdivision and planning process, comprehensive overview of the city's of Pearland subdivision and planning process, beginning with the application intake and ending with recordation. And I guess let me start with this before. Staff was nice enough to put together something for us. The last meeting, we had some issues with knowing the process and knowing what happens when an applicant comes in, what they fill out, how they go through that process. It's good for us to hear some of the feedback from staff and understand that whole process. And staff put together a presentation for us, which I really appreciate. Thank you all.
Thank you. Vince Husted, city staff. This presentation will present the subdivision and platting process. Basically, what is a plat? A plat is a simplified method of subdividing real property into parcels that are recorded with the county that may be bought or sold. Why is platting important to the city? It provides the basis for the orderly creation of real property for future development. Plats record utility easements. They dedicate right-of-way. They also ensure financial responsibility on the part of developers. And it also provides forethought prior to the creating of lots that are permanently recorded as real property. And basically, the goal is to protect the property rights of citizens of the city. What does a plat consist of? A plat consists of a map showing the boundaries of the property represented. A plat also directly ties the map to a written legal description of the property. A plat also links the property to the original land survey. What are the results from a plat? Well, number one, the legal description of the property is simplified. Number two, the plat uses lots, blocks, and the name of the subdivision to describe the properties. Otherwise, the legal description would be a long, complicated meets and bounds description. Three, the legal description resulting from a plat replaces, like I said, the complicated meets and bound description of the property. What are some of the types of plats? Well, as you may already know, there are the types of plats reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission are master plats, preliminary plats, final plats, replats, and amending plats. Most of those types of plats we had examples of at this meeting tonight. However, there are also types of plats that are approved administratively and not reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Those include development plats, preliminary development plats, final development plats, and minor plats. Section 1.1.3.3 establishes the advisory capacity of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Basically what that says is that the Planning and Zoning Commission shall advise the City Council on applications and petitions for legislative decisions as authorized by this Unified Development Code. In that capacity, the Commission shall review, prepare reports upon, and make recommendations concerning approval, conditional approval, or denying of the types of plats that come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. Section 1.1.3.4 establishes the authority for deciding applications. The Planning and Zoning Commission shall finally decide the following types of quasi-judicial applications. And then it goes on to describe an application for a subdivision master plat, an application for a preliminary plat or a preliminary development plat. It also describes applications for the final subdivision plats, final plats, replats, and then it also gives the Planning Commission the authority to review requests for variances from the requirements of Chapter 3, which is the subdivision regulations, of which we had two such variance requests, as you already know, at this meeting tonight. The Planning and Zoning Commission shall also be the final decider of final subdivision plats and final development plats for which a preliminary subdivision plat or preliminary development plat respectively has been approved, and an application for an amending plat that has been forwarded by the planning director. Next, we get into the issue of the complete application. This is established by section 1.2.1.2. Every application for legislative action or application for a development permit or approval referred to in this section as an application authorized by this Unified Development Code shall be subject to a determination of completeness by the official responsible for processing the application. It also states that no application shall be accepted by the responsible official for processing unless it is accompanied by all documents required by and prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Unified Development Code. It also states that the incompleteness of the application shall be grounds for denial or revocation of the application. So if it's incomplete, it won't go before the Planning and Zoning Commission. A determination of completeness shall not constitute a determination of compliance with the substantive requirements of this code. It's just basically saying, hey, either all the documents are here for the application that are required or they're not. Complete application. This is also from section 1.2.1.2. A determination of completeness shall be made by the responsible official in writing to the applicant no later than the 10th business day after the official filing date that the application is submitted to the responsible official. The determination shall specify the documents or other information needed to complete the application and shall state the date the application will expire if the documents or other information is not provided. An application shall be deemed complete on the 11th business day after the application has been received, and if the applicant has not otherwise been notified that the application is incomplete. And I also might add that the Development Review Committee that meets with the city is within that 10-day period, and sometimes the resulting comments from a Development Review Committee may be that the application is incomplete. However, with complete applications, the application shall expire on the 45th day after the date the application is filed if A, the applicant fails to provide documents or other information necessary to comply with the city's requirements relating to the permit application. B, the city provides the applicant not later than the 10th business day after the date of the application is filed written notice that specifies the necessary documents or other information and the date the application will expire if the documents or other information is not provided. And C, the applicant fails to provide the specified documents or other information within the time provided in the notice. If the application is not completed on the 45th day after the application is submitted to the responsible official, the application will be deemed to have expired, and it will be returned to the applicant together with any accompanying applications. However, Section 1.2.1.3 does provide the ability to request waivers. Notwithstanding the requirements of Section 1.2.1.2, the responsible official may initially waive the submission of any information in the application and accompanying materials that is not necessary due to the scope and nature of the proposed activity. The decision maker may withdraw a waiver of application requirements if the decision maker determines that meeting the previously waived requirements is necessary to determine compliance with applicable standards of approval. Action by responsible official. Section 1.2.1.9. Following the determination that an application is complete, the responsible official shall circulate the application to all other administrative officials who review is required for a decision on the application and compile the comments and recommendations of the officials. The responsible official shall render a decision in the time prescribed if the official is the decision maker for the application. In all other cases, the responsible official shall forward the application for review to any advisory body and the final decision maker and prepare a report to such board or commission or to the city council as the case may be, including the compilation of any comments and recommendations by other administrative officials. The responsible official shall also prepare required notices and schedule the application for decision within a time frame and in the manner required by the Unified Development Code. And next we get to Section 3.1.1.4, which establishes the time for decision making. Time period for action. All plat applications shall be acted upon within 30 days from the following date unless a waiver is submitted in accordance with Section B below. Waiver request. An applicant may request a waiver in writing of the decision time. Such waiver, when granted, shall operate to postpone the official filing date of the plat by the number of days the waiver is granted. The waiver request shall contain a statement of the reasons for the waiver and the time for which a waiver is sought. No waiver shall be granted for a period less than a number of days until the Commission's next regularly scheduled meeting, nor longer than 40 days. Waiver requests must be received by the responsible official on or before the 7th calendar day prior to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting at which action is to be taken on the plat application. Waiver requests that are not received by that day shall not be considered properly submitted, and action will be taken on a plat application at such meeting as scheduled. Only one waiver may be granted per plat. Action on the waiver request. That looks like the same thing I just said. Stages for approval. There are subdivision plats. The subdivision plat may be approved in 3 stages. There is the master plat, the preliminary subdivision plat, and the final plat, subdivision plat, which all come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. On the other hand, there are also development plats in which a development may be approved in 1 stage. These are basically your subdivisions that are generally 4 lots and less, and if they result in a division of property, they are called minor plats. But if it's creating 1 property and not subdividing a property, it is simply referred to as a development plat, but the approval processes are the same. As for the issue of combined applications, an applicant may not submit applications for approval of a preliminary subdivision plat and a final subdivision plat simultaneously. City staff review is required. City staff shall review all plat applications in conformance with a checklist that is based on application forms and related requirements supplied by the planning department. City staff shall then accept or reject the plat application. Plat applications that are deemed to be complete shall be accepted and forwarded to the appropriate body as outlined in the UDC. This is an example of the city's universal plat application. It's shrunk down a little bit to be able to fit on a screen, but it covers not only applications for plat, but also any zoning requests, P&Z variances, variances that also go before the zoning board of adjustment and zone changes.
Vince, could you show the commissioners, this is the application that all the applicants fill out. Could you zoom into the box in the middle of that
Let's see.
form? Control plus.
Let's see, zoom. Oops. Yeah. See if I can get back to that slide. Here it is. Let's see.
Push this button right here.
Bottom right.
Plus button right here. Mhm. There you go.
So all the applicants are notified that if any additional information is required from staff, that their item could be postponed.
Let's see. Oh.
There you go.
This is part I found, interesting when we have applicants come in, this, that, just said, basically here, when a completed application packet has been accepted and reviewed, additional information may be required by staff as a result of the review process. Therefore, it may be necessary to postpone the proposed project and remove it from the scheduled agenda and place it on a future agenda according to section 1.2.1.2 of the UDC. Given some of the recent issues on some of the plats, that's on the application, the first thing you see bold in a box. That's one of the items I thought was appropriate to some of the things we hear from applicants.
All right. Shall I continue?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. This next sheet is the plat application checklist. For different types of plats, there is different sets of documentation that need to be submitted with the application. Basically, a simple way to describe it, master plats, preliminary plats, and final plats, since they involve large tracts of land, they usually require more information for consideration that require to be brought to the Planning and Zoning Commission, whereas a simple development plat may be just somebody trying to get a building permit for a house, and a development plat's not going to require the same amount of, it's not going to require the dedication of public right-of-way or extensive extension of sewer lines the way say a 240-acre subdivision with 1,000 homes on it. Master plat. A master plat is required for plan developments and cluster plans. The purpose of the master plat is to demonstrate that the development will accommodate the amenities listed in the plan development or cluster plan. And it also delineates the sequence of development outlined by an approved plan development. The preliminary plat is required in all zoning districts for the division of property into 5 or more lots. The preliminary plat ensures that future infrastructure and landscaping will fit onto the site. Approval of a preliminary plat allows for site improvements, so with approval of preliminary plat, it allows the developer to start building streets and installing infrastructure such as water and sewer lines that would serve the future lots in the plat. The final plats are the documents that get recorded at the county. This is a document that allows the property to be bought and sold, and it also allows building permits to be approved for those lots. It shows only the information necessary to be recorded at the county. So the final plat is not going to have information that might be found on the preliminary plat, such as contour lines and water courses that might be found on a preliminary plat. A replat. Replat is basically used to reconfigure an existing platted lot. It is often used to combine multiple lots into fewer lots, or it may be used to divide a lot into multiple lots. We also have amending plats. They are used to reconfigure an existing platted lot. These may be used if easements or rights-of-way need to be changed. And then we have development plat, minor plat. These are limited to the creation of 4 or fewer lots. And the main distinction between development plat and minor plat is that the development plat is just one lot and not really subdividing property. These do not require new or improved infrastructure, and these may also be administratively approved. And then we have preliminary development plats. These have information shown similar to a preliminary plat. However, these are approved administratively, and they must conform to a development plan covering property. These are mostly found in the BP 288 zoning district, and in my time working here, I haven't had to deal with very many of these types of plats. And the same is true for final development plats, in which the information is shown similar to a final plat. They're approved administratively, and they must conform to preliminary development plat. And again, they are mostly found in the BP 288 zoning district. This is a flow chart that shows the entire subdivision and platting process. Basically, it starts with the submittal and approval of a master plat for staff review and by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then it describes the preliminary plat process, and then it also describes the final plat process and how the final plat results in the recordation of lots that would allow building permits to be issued for a property within the plat. This next chart is our 2017 plat submittal schedule. And for the sake of demonstration, I will use the April 4th, 2017 submittal deadline date. On this chart, April 4th is the application submittal deadline to place plats on the agenda for the May 15th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. However, April 4th is also the resubmittal deadline for applications that are going to go before the April 17th Planning and Zoning Commission, and is the resubmittal deadline for applications that were originally submitted on March 21st. So as you can see by these dates, the application submittal deadline for one cycle of plats is also the resubmittal deadline for an additional set of plats. So in using the flow chart for preliminary subdivision plats, we have often pre-development meeting with staff and the applicant. Then the applicant submits an application for the Planning and Zoning Commission approval of a preliminary plat. Staff reviews that plat at the Development Review Committee meeting, and staff reviewers include members from the Planning, Engineering, Public Works, and Parks Department, and a few other organizations, and even outside entities such as Brazoria Drainage District Number 4. The comments are taken from the Development Review Committee. They're sent back to the sent out to the applicant through the city's via the city's track-it system, and as a result of that, the applicant will then take those comments and then submit a revised plat that addresses the comments that had been made by city staff. And then staff reviews the comments and the revisions and makes a report to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then it is brought to the Planning and Zoning Commission for consideration of approval. So getting back to April 4th, on April 4th, we have the submittal deadline for plats that will go on the May 1st Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. And April 4th is also the same day as the resubmittal deadline for applications that are going to the April 17th Planning and Zoning Commission. So at the same time, we're reviewing new plats and previous plats. And then on April 18th, we will have the resubmittal deadline for the May 1st Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for the applications that had been submitted on April 4th. And April 18th will also be the same day as the submittal deadline for the applications that will go before the May 15th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. The final subdivision plat process is this similar to the preliminary plat process in that there will often be a pre-application meeting. There will be a application submitted for the Planning and Zoning Commission to review a final plat. And again, there will be another staff review of the final plat application in which it will be reviewed by members of planning, engineering, public works, parks, fire department. And then the review comments are sent to the applicant, and then the applicant will return to us a revised plat addressing those staff comments. And then those staff comments are used to be reviewed for the benefit of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, and then presented at a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. The only difference is that the biggest difference is with the final plats is that they'll get recorded with the county. So again, April 4th is a deadline for submittal of final plats that will go before the Planning and Zoning Commission on May 1st, which is also the same day as the resubmittal of revised final plats that will go before the April 17th Planning and Zoning Commission. And then on April 18th, we will have the resubmittal deadline for the final plats that will go before the May 1st Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. which will also be the same day as the submittal deadline for final plats that will go before the May 15th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. So basically, we have a submittal cycle in which week one is the submittal on a Tuesday, and then the next Tuesday, a week later, is the Development Review Committee meeting, and then the following Tuesday, in week three, is the resubmittal deadline, which is also the same week that we are preparing the staff reports and getting the packets together to go out to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting that is on Monday of week 4. And that whole time cycle between the submittal and the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting is actually less than 30 days that's required by the UDC. This is a chart showing the submittal cycle. Now, I mentioned a 4-week submittal cycle, but in practicality, the work is really constricted down to 3 weeks, because in the first 3 weeks, we usually have until Friday to get the work done. But in that 4th week, at the beginning of the week, on Monday, is the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. So we don't really have all of week 4, because week 4, we have to have everything presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Now let me explain the Development Review Committee meeting. Tuesdays from 9 to 11 in the morning, following the application week. A week after the application submittal deadline, city staff from multiple departments review the plats, which includes representatives from planning, public works, engineering, fire, building codes. And typical responses that we receive from those departments is either a list of corrections that need to be made to the plat, or sometimes they'll just say approved or no comment. And usually by approved is they really don't have a comment, and they don't have opposition to a plat as far as their specific department is concerned. After the DRC, we provide comments to the owner and CC the applicant, because usually the applicant is the engineering firm or the surveyor versus the actual owner or developer of the property. However, staff comments are compiled by the plats administrator and provides them to the applicant by the Friday of the week following the application date. It's simpler for me to think of it as the Friday after the Development Review Committee meeting. And an email with comments will be sent to the applicant and property owner, and a copy of the markup. The resubmittal deadlines, they are Tuesdays at 5 p.m., 2 weeks prior to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. The applicant must resubmit the plat with all required corrections by 5 p.m. If the applicant is not ready to resubmit by the deadline, he or she has the option of withdrawing the application plat in writing or requesting a waiver of decision. What happens if an application is withdrawn? Even if withdrawn, the applicant will be listed on the P&Z agenda. If withdrawn by 9 a.m. of the resubmittal deadline, the applicant will not be charged any reapplication fees. However, if the application is withdrawn after the resubmittal date, but no later than 9 a.m. of the P&Z date, we will charge a recheck fee of $200 at the time of resubmittal. What if an application is not withdrawn? If the applicant does not withdraw by 9 a.m. of the P&Z date, the Planning and Zoning Commission will take action on the plat at the meeting. If the plat is denied, full fees will be required if the applicant reapplies. If the applicant resubmits but the corrections are not complete, the applicant has the same option of withdrawing in writing or letting the P&Z take action. The same policy regarding fees will apply as to plats that are not resubmitted. If the applicant submits in writing a waiver of decision letter for an extension of time, no application fees will be required, and they will bring in their corrected plats on the next submittal date allowed within their extension of time. And as you already know, Our Planning and Zoning Commission meetings are held on the first and third Monday of each month at 6:30 p.m. or earlier if posted. At the meeting, in which preliminary plats, final plats, and master plats are reviewed, the order of the meeting is that the chair introduces the plat. If it's not on the consent agenda, the staff will make a presentation, and then the applicants are given an opportunity to speak, and then if there's public testimony, the Planning Commission can take that testimony, and then there's a commission discussion in which the commissioners will discuss the issues among themselves and ask questions of staff and the applicant, and then there's a motion and vote. What happens after the meeting? Well, after the meeting, disposition letters are sent to the applicant, and then the applicants generate Mylars for recording. Once plats are signed and the courier recordation fees are collected, the signed final plat with tax certificates, and if the plat is outside the city limits in our ETJ, the city engineer will complete an affidavit for properties in the ETJ, and then all these documents are sent to the county courthouse for recordation. It's been my experience that the time for recordation of a plat generally varies, because sometimes the property owner might have to get signatures from individuals out of state, so it might take a while before they get the Mylars to the city, and then sometimes they can get the Mylars signed on their end very quickly before submitting it to the city for staff signatures. What about plats that are approved by staff? The process of sending staff comments to the applicants after the DRC is the same. The plat in question, however, does not get presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission. However, the signature process is similar, except that the city planner will sign the Mylars instead of the Planning and Zoning Commission chair. The recordation process with the county is the same. However, the 30-day review deadline is the same for the city to take action on the plat. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I think you can send that out to the commission, can't you? You send the presentation out? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the PDF, yeah.
So I got a couple questions.
Sure.
So you talked about the responsible official and the decision maker for a plat. Who are the responsible officials? Are they assigned to one person or multiple people within the planning group?
Generally, in the planning group, the particularly for the administratively approved plats, that is delegated to the plats administrator. But it's through the city planner.
But overall, in that regard, it's
Multiple levels.
Basically, in reviewing the plats, the plats administrator is not working in a vacuum, but is working with other city staff such as legal, engineering, parks department, public works, because what the plats affects a lot of work that a lot of other city departments have to do and rely on.
So the responsible party will start with the class administrator, go to the city planner, this commission, council.
Okay. I think one thing that we see that wasn't mentioned was that final plat, we get a lot of approvals for final plats because it's a key point for getting power with the power company. You have to assign addresses, and the only way to assign addresses is for a final plat. That's why we see things that are approved final plat that aren't built yet. It's one of the things we need. So you say on Tuesday your deadline's at 5 p.m., but we've heard from the commission, we've heard various applicants say we've turned that in to staff, and staff says, well, we received it on Thursday. Information should come in to y'all by 5 o'clock on Tuesday so that it can be reviewed by the DRC each week. How many times does that not happen? So it happens
Yeah.
quite often, because we've heard it. I've heard it here myself. I think most everybody's heard that from applicants where information comes in and y'all haven't been given the opportunity to even review it if it comes in on Thursday and our
Well,
meeting's on
I
Monday.
think with the resubmittals, a big problem is that even if they come in by that 5 p.m. deadline, we're having to put our staff reports together that week to try to get them done by Wednesday, the next day. So if a resubmittal that comes in that does not address all the comments, it kind of creates a difficult situation where there's, in my opinion, not really a very realistic way of having everybody review those comments and get it turned around in time in order to meet the deadlines for putting everything on the agenda. Because typically we like to have our staff reports done far enough in advance where we're not having to rush around at the last minute to get them sent to the Planning and Zoning Commission, because if the Planning and Zoning Commission, I mean, it doesn't allow very much time for the commissioners to review those applications before the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
Mr. Beaver, we're already on a tight schedule when it's submitted the correct way, but then when they submit, when applicants submit things late, it complicates situations.
Well, why even put it on the planning and zoning agenda then? If they don't have everything in, I mean, to me, if they haven't done everything that's necessary for us to make a decision, then why do we even have a chance to look at it?
It goes back to that section that Vince stated earlier, the responsible party. If we were required, once the application is complete and they've met that checklist, we're on the timeline to bring it to you guys for a decision. And Vince spoke about that earlier in one of the earlier sections when we were pulling the code, but we're on that timeline because the application was deemed complete just on the checklist, but they didn't meet maybe the requirements of the DRC review committee.
Complete but not correct.
Right. And there have been,
So the meat is, it has to be complete. They're trying to help correct, but just meeting the checklist gets it in front of us. And that's staff's job to report to us what's not complete or where there's issues.
and sometimes I mean, I have in the past rejected applications that never made it to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and sometimes it can be an issue such as the application wasn't formed, or the application form wasn't signed, or the fee wasn't paid, and then I just say it won't be on the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting because the application is incomplete, and this is why it's incomplete.
If there is, I know there's timelines also to put the agenda out. That has to go out by a certain time. If we know ahead of time, or if staff knows ahead of time that there's something on the agenda that isn't complete, instead of having a discussion about it, can it not be pulled instead of doing anything to move it forward on the agenda? In other words, say this isn't ready to be approved, there are things missing, we'll move this forward to the next agenda.
Sometimes I've had to have that discussion with the applicant, basically essentially ask them to submit a waiver or request an extension, or ask them to withdraw an application before a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting in order to get those issues resolved, with the hope that they would be able to bring something to us that we would be able to recommend clean, straight approval and not even have to have conditions attached to the application.
Okay, now I've got another question since you brought up conditions. we're making a motion to approve things, and yet they come up later on and they have conditions. Why can we not hear the staff report, know there are conditions to be added, and then make the motion for approval? Then we don't have to go back and do amended motions, and we know that there's something there, or we know that, we may even make a motion to table it. But we can't, we can do that, but there seems to me to be a little bit of, when it comes to the agenda, it's out of order. The motion should be made after the staff approval, then we know what's in it.
Well, if I could add a comment, the P and Z gets these on Friday and they
know.
don't change. The staff recommendations are in there. If you wish to make the motion to approve, it can be with the staff conditions from the start. We can do that.
Well, maybe that's the way we. Well, or if, even if we can just, we could probably change the motion to say, and including any staff recommendations. Maybe that would work. But to me, it seems like we're making a motion on something.
I mean,
I don't care if we do read it. We could read it 5 times.
well, that has to do also with late items that might be resolved by the time Monday comes around. Friday when this goes out, or Thursday when it's prepared, because it needs to go out Friday. There's all day Friday and all day Monday that things can change and be worked out. And it may not be a condition anymore by the time staff gives a report.
It's conditional on.
If it doesn't, it's on the consent agenda. If it does still have issues, it's on new business.
Yeah,
Right.
but I think I'm hearing something slightly different from Mary. Why do we have to make a motion to approve just to hear it?
Right. That's basically why why can't we hear it and then make the motion? Then we know because what we're really doing, I don't care, we've read it, okay? We'll go beyond that. But what we're doing is making a motion on something that staff is going to get up and tell us what we're making a motion on. It's backwards, basically.
I'm not sure if I can change that for you. I can only suggest that pursuant to the P&Z rules and to Robert's Rules of Order, you're going to have it on the table, which means somebody's going to have to put it on the table first with the motion. But I do agree that you can, if you wanted to prevent the number of motions that you make and the number of votes that you have to take, make a motion to approve with staff recommendations from the get-go if you've identified that there are conditions or staff recommendations.
Or use the word possible, including any possible staff recommendations. That way we don't have to change anything.
And from the legal department, we would always prefer you to have as much specificity as possible. So any recommendations, it might be that 2 of you want one of the recommendations, 3 of you want a different one. And
well, then we can come up with them. Then it can be amended because everything's on the table. You can amend anything that's on the table.
Which is why I would recommend you make a motion with all of staff conditions, not any. In my mind, from the legal department, there's a difference between those 2 articles.
I would refer as listed in the agenda, so we know that ties it to the text in the agenda.
And the result of doing it as listed in the agenda is that you're going to end up making a motion if there are staff conditions. Again, it's y'all's preference as to how you want to do it. We just want to make sure at the end of the day we comply with everybody's rules.
As long as we're talking about conditions, if we attach conditions to a preliminary plat, we have reasonable confidence they're going to get done because there's a final plat approval coming. If we attach conditions to a final plat, what leverage does the city have to make sure that those conditions are actually satisfied?
The city has to sign off on the recordation. For example, like a final plat approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission, the commission chair has to sign the Mylar, and the chair might find something that.
If I could, on final plats, we've done a condition of I believe, city confirming the surety bond is in place. And that's just a simple, staff confirms with legal and whoever within the city that that's on file. And once that's met, they can record the final plat.
The difficulty with that is if this condition isn't met and we have the 30-day deadline that we have to comply with by state law, we don't have a mechanism for you to actually disapprove it. And unfortunately, there's a separate section in state law that says that if you don't formally disapprove it, they could bypass us altogether and get a certification letter saying that you did not take a disapproval action, which makes it approved. So
that goes back.
Staff's preference would always be, or at least the legal department would always suggest, especially for a final plat, if there's any risk involved, do not approve it with conditions. Postpone it or approve it with a specific condition saying that it will be denied unless this is done by X date, which is within those 30 days of its original submittal, so that your approval with the condition is extremely specific, and the result of that would be it could be nothing but a disapproval if the condition is not met. Otherwise, we have to try to organize a meeting, comply with the Open Meetings Act to get it posted, and have you formally disapprove it in order to prevent that bypass procedure that's in state law saying that you did not formally disapprove it, therefore it is approved.
Okay, so just so I understand, we can, for a final plat, we can make an approval with conditions, so long as the conditions are met within 30 days, otherwise there'll be an automatic disapproval. And if it's a condition that goes out longer than 30 days, we're at risk.
It's going to be within 30 days of the plat being submitted, not within your time frame. And as you saw with Vince's schedule, the plat gets submitted about 3 weeks to 4 weeks. But I mean, we're talking about an issue of an overlap of anywhere from maybe 2 to 6 days, if I understand the schedule, depending on where they were in this. It's unlikely that you'll ever be able to formally disapprove something is the end result of that.
And for the record, staff would prefer to have final plats that could be approved without a list of conditions from planning perspective.
If we have a final plat for approval and it's not on the consent agenda, that should be a sign to everybody that something is off. At least from the legal department's perspective, because the completeness review should have been gone through. The checklist should have been done. Final plat approvals, because people should have complied with the checklist for completeness and for what I'm going to say adequacy, for lack of a better term, meaning they've addressed all of staff levels. It should always be on the consent agenda. And if it's not, then there's something that we need you to A, be aware of, and B, attempt to address as best you can, which might be to recommend disapproval or to postpone until a certain item is resolved.
And most of the time, it's the surety bond and the improvement agreement or subdivision agreement or whatever the term is.
As Vince said, that's actually one of the things that should be in with the completeness review. Unfortunately, oftentimes people submit their subdivision improvement agreement at the same time they submit their final plat, and well, that's already too late. Mm-hmm. And we're still waiting on third parties to confirm those bonds that we have no control over.
And that's one of the items P&Z must, I believe, check to make sure is in place before we grant final approval.
Because again, that subdivision improvement agreement is verifying public infrastructure, which normally would be done prior to final plat approval. But the rub there comes, they need the addresses from CenterPoint to move things along. And that's why we've allowed that process to get the final plat approval, to get the addressing, so that they could work with CenterPoint or whatever the electric provider might be.
It does allow for sale of lots, too.
Which allows for the sale of lots. Yes, that's ultimately what it comes down to. But we wanted to create a process that protects the people buying the lots, ultimately the homeowners, and at the same time lets the project move forward. And I guess the best way to describe that is put taxable value on vacant land as quickly as possible.
something minor that's not gonna actually change the actual layout or design of the project.
Thank you all. Item 4, number 2, Commissioners' Activity Report. Nope. So our next P and Z regular meeting is April 17th. Does anybody know they will not be here? That being said, we'll adjourn the meeting at 8:40.